Henry. How's it going, buddy?
Good, Mickey. It's been too long, my friend.
That's true. That's true. So I'm very, very excited about, this third session that we're about to have because I've been, following your journey since you ran the investment arm for El Al, which is the Israeli national airline. And then you moved on to become a venture capitalist and an investor. And then we had the opportunity to run a conference together, an online travel conference.
The
And
best
today you're
conference
running.
ever.
That's true. That's
Virtual
true.
conference.
I
A
think it was the
pioneer.
largest. True, true. It was the first one after the pandemic started, and I think it was the largest one so far.
I think we got an
What
award for
for
it too. No? We got an
we
award
might
for
have.
something. Yeah. During
We
COVID.
might have, yes. So I'm very, very excited because you are a creative thinker and you're, seeing this industry, you're focusing on the travel industry for so long, and you have so many amazing and interesting, angles of looking at this. So I'm very happy to have you here, but thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you, obviously. I think it's very important to what you're doing with this podcast series. And it's an honor to
Yes,
be
I
part of it.
think, yeah, and as part of our work at TrueSpots and the products that we're building, and we're meeting so many amazing people in the industry, and I always would thinking like there were so many amazing discussions that I wish people could just listen to, and I never had the chance. So this is the idea of this short video podcast. Cool. So I want to run into the first question I have, and I want to open this into a discussion because you are not only investing in travel, but you're very active in travel and you have amazing partnerships you're doing with your companies and with different projects and stuff in the past few years. Why travel? What is your thing with travel?
Well, it's a good question. Historically speaking, I kind sort of fumbled into travel back in 2014, 2015. The main thing was that I was looking at different industries to kind of try and make an impact. Back at that time, I was doing more deep tech, Internet of Things, that type of stuff. And then looking at travel, it was very clear. Certain aspects were very clear and really didn't make a lot of sense. So travel industry is huge, right? I mean, it depends on who you ask, but we're talking, I don't know, 8, 10 trillion dollar. It's probably the fourth, maybe, pre-COVID at least, fourth biggest industry in the world. For a decade, it was the fastest growing after manufacturing. It was very, 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 let's say, high growth, high potential industry. But at the same time, in terms of VC capital, virtually unrepresented. You can
Well,
count.
that has stuff to do with the low margins, I guess.
I have potentially, but some travel businesses are doing quite well.
That's true.
Um, so I think there was a lot of room, and then when you look on the tech stack, right, which you're very well familiar with, it was pretty much stuck in the 70s. It's still is sort of. So the combination of all these things together made sense to kind of get into travel and try and make an impact in the industry. And but that was like back in 2014, 2015. So I had the pleasure to start probably the first institutionalized corporate venture fund with El Al, and then later we added on Boeing and Lufthansa and Gate Group, and we had partnerships with JetBlue and IATA, and anyway, we did a lot of interesting stuff that back at the time we were everything we did was like the first ever, the first accelerator, the first investment in that space, in this space. I think to this day we're one of the top five investors, most active investors in the space, and I haven't been part of the fund for the last 2 years, so I don't know what it says more maybe about the industry than the fund, but still, yeah. So that's kind of how it happened.
And it seems like you know the industry very, very well. And before we're digging into another project that you're running right now, which I'm curious and very, very fascinated by, tell me a little bit about, how do you see a little bit about the future you see of venture capital and travel startups, because as you mentioned before, like venture capitalists are not organically attracted to travel
Yeah.
startups, and there's a bridge to be built there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's kind of, so that was one of the key experiences I've had during the 4 or 5 years I managed the fund, was that investors and then travel founders, travel tech founders, and also corporates in the space, they don't really speak the same language. And this is obviously true in any industry, but in travel, I experienced it firsthand. And a lot of the work was about how can we bridge that gap. Look, there's two ways of looking at it. From an investment perspective, progressive investors tend to go for opportunities where you don't have a lot of competition, or you have a distressed asset that that's kind of the way that you manage the risk to some extent. And I think travel, looking specifically right now, COVID, post-COVID, no matter how you want to call it, it's the progressives' time to take advantage of the situation. It was even more like that a year ago, and I think most of the people, most of the organizations, most of the funds that took advantage are essentially, rolling in the dough now. Some unrealized, some already realized, but still. And I think it makes perfect sense because historically speaking, travel as an industry, it's a mega industry. It's not an industry like all the others. It's, aviation has been around 100 years, maybe 108, something like that. And it keeps going up. And if you look at travel in general, if you look at like the number of passengers, historically speaking, it's always going up. It doesn't matter if there's the swine flu, if there's
But
SARS.
it's also becomes very accessible, right? Because
Right.
once the open sky thing and all of these stuff just started happening, so even if you're isolated in some area with pretty bad economic status, you still can travel, which is a big thing.
Yeah, it's
But
kind of like
that
it's a
also, by
human
the way,
need, I
creates
think.
it also creates the problem for the airlines because they need to get the prices down all the time, and there's a branding problem, and the product is pretty the same, and etc.
But then you have like different tiers. Like if you talked about airlines, for example, then you have a more commercial airline. Airlines originally were not commercial entities; they were government owned, most of them. And then you started
Right.
seeing entrepreneurs coming to the space, right? Richard Branson, or all the other players that we all know very well. And then commercial airlines came to be a new financial models, and low cost and ultra low cost, and then ultra low cost that were flying, continental. And so it's a very exciting industry, honestly. But the biggest joke about airlines or aviation, if we look at travel, specifically in aviation, then how do you make a small fortune in aviation? You familiar with this? So
No.
you start with a big one. It's one of those industries where you get hooked on it, but it's not an easy industry. Very complex. Yeah.
And I'll take you a little bit away from venture capital because you are a very fascinating investor, but also you have Travel Tech Nation, which is, I think, one of the most inspiring programs or ecosystems within the travel ecosystem. And I think you brought, for the first time, the word community into the space. Tell me about this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's all part of the.
And I think
Yeah.
you should start with what Travel Tech Nation is.
Okay, maybe what it is, yeah. So it actually started roughly we launched it at the same time we did our conference, right? At the peak of COVID, right? It was like April. Essentially, when I was back with the fund, the corporate fund, I was always feeling this gap between the different hats I had, right? The corporate investor, the financial investor, the sitting on the board of the founders, and kind of trying to kind of translate between all the different parties that they interact with, so that there's more tech adoption and that startups do better and the industry moves forward. And it's very hard, because most of these players, they don't know what the other side of the table cares about. Not really. Most of them haven't crossed to the other side. And travel specifically also is a very specialized industry. It's not, everyone comes into contact with it, right? Because everyone travels. But the experience of a traveler, it's really nothing close to what happens behind the scenes. And that pretty much makes it very hard to get tech adoption moving faster in our space. Also, there's a lot of legacy that's very difficult to change. So the way to solve it essentially is to try and bridge the gap, and that gap is multi-layered, right? So we have let's say, for example, there's the knowledge gap, right? I mean, people just don't know what other people know, and if everyone knows everything, then it'll be easier to talk about it and solve things. And then there's the exploration gap, or people don't know that the others actually exist. So if I'm an entrepreneur and I want to talk to a specific corporate, do you know how many, like if I sell to a travel agency, do you know how many travel agencies there are in the US, for example, or just in Chicago?
By the way, that was a big problem when I started. Like we actually had this problem because I had to, I didn't know around the world what was the market. It was very hard because we were selling to both like online travel agencies and small agencies. And I remember that I had to reach to ARC in the US to buy literally a list of all the agencies to make sure that I know what the numbers are.
Yeah, absolutely. There are organizations, ARC is one of them, but there are other organizations as well that essentially have lists of the different players in different segments in travel, because there's so many of them. And this obviously differs geographically. So what I'm trying to say is that it's very, very fragmented. Anywhere you look, it's fragmented. The investors are fragmented, startups, the different customers, right? The corporates that may acquire you someday. It's very, very hard to make sense of it all. So obviously, most of the people don't even know each other because they don't know even the organizations. And so that's kind of what we try to solve. So we said, okay, we don't want to do this as a service because that exists, usually very regionally, but that's not really scalable. Could be a good business, but not scalable, and that's not what we try to do. We didn't think about it from a business perspective, at least in the early days. The idea was, how can we build tech? Because that's kind of coming out of Israel, right? That's like our unique special sauce, whatever you want to call it. How can we build different products to kind of tackle these different layers of the problem one at a time? And to some extent, I mean, the conference we did, also helped, because at the time, COVID at its peak, if you remember, companies were afraid to talk, right? Because they were waiting for a bailout, or they didn't want to impact the stock price, or I don't know, they wanted to keep a facade that everything's well, everything's great with us, because they didn't want to disappoint investors or whatever. And that really hurts entrepreneurs, because they need to know what's going on. So the conversations only happen behind closed doors, and not everyone has that access. And we were trying to kind of find a way to create a stage for a bigger conversation, right? And you came up with the idea of let's do a conference, which initially sounded crazy to me, but actually was pretty genius. And we ended up doing it, and I think it was a huge success. We couldn't get everyone we wanted to talk, because some of them couldn't, technically. But the ones who did, they inspired people to understand what's going on. People knew the problems better. People knew what's coming better. Some of the people actually got, hope from it, because they didn't know what's going on. So that was the idea. And then I said, okay, the thing about the idea behind Travel Tech Nation was, how can we create this single source of truth where everyone, doesn't matter which role you play in travel tech, can come in and, everyone's aligned. And so that was the original idea. So we created like our own version of Crunchbase, sort of. like an open sourced, crowdsourced.
I remember that with all these startups.
Yeah,
So you can
right.
find every startup, you can find the
Yeah.
contacts. It was just
So that was the idea, and we keep getting. I think what happens is that especially when you're a starting startup, right, a fledgling startup, you're thinking, okay, I need more exposure. I want to be part of this community. So where can I be? And this is pretty much the only game in town globally, and
right.
it doesn't cost them anything. Also, I mean, we don't charge for it.
So let me just explain that in different words a little bit. So essentially, what Travel Tech Nation does today is this is like the main square of the travel industry. It basically allows you to come over and meet everybody who does anything in the space and learn about their activity and show yourself up and show what you're doing, which is perfect. And that's how you connect with people easily. And you have the opportunity to learn from them because you also have the sessions learning sessions.
So that's
which
like
are
you're
not
tapping
even...
into the more advanced layers. So right, we started with this like database which anyone can use and anyone can join and doesn't cost you anything. And then we took the content from the conference and created like our own version of Netflix, sort of, right? Like you can come and search for big data in hospitality and see someone talk about what happens in that space, and you can get some information. And so, if you're a corporate, if you're an investor, if you're a startup, then everyone is aligned now about, what that means, a taste of it anyway. And then we said, okay, so if we really want to solve the biggest problems in travel, we just need to have the right people, the right decision makers, essentially make decisions. So we need them to talk to one another and, move the industry forward and talk about the hard issues, the hard topics. And it's very hard during COVID. It's also very hard during, with a global industry where people meet, 2-3 times a year in, the same conferences. But what happens the rest of the year? So that's how we kind of so we partnered with Focusrite, which is a well-respected brand in the space. They do research, media. They don't need an introduction, and essentially created our own secret treehouse, right? Not so secret, which is kind of like the missing link. So we said, okay, we use tech to connect global leaders in travel tech who can move the industry forward and essentially tackle the biggest challenges. So we created this home for like handpicked, or let's say a network of leading entrepreneurs, influencers, investors, C-level executives mostly, from some of travel's biggest players. And the goal was to shape the future of travel with their decisions today. And so to do that, we created our own proprietary platform to create the experience, the virtual experience that, people actually would appreciate as opposed to, like a typical Zoom or a webinar. Something a lot more interactive, a lot more personal, where people can actually, move around and, you got to see it to believe it, but it works. So that was kind of the idea, and I think so far we have like 120 members now. Originally,
but we got to say that like these are high level individuals in the industry. These are CEOs and VPs of the largest corporations who basically run this industry.
Absolutely. I'll share a story. So we had, and also we bring to meet the members, right, the leaders, we bring essentially the icons of the industry, right? So we had, Chris Nassetta, the president and CEO of Hilton, was the last one. And, before that, we had the CEOs of, Kayak, TripAdvisor, President Travel at Amadeus. We had, the folks at Certares, every brand you can think of. We have, Amex GPT, CWT, anyone really, like all the big brands. We usually have the CEO come and essentially meet in a sort of intimate environment, which means like 20-30 people most, and there's no agenda. It's not like a lecture. It's essentially a conversation between the leaders of the industry and this person. So, for example, we had Steve Kaufer come, was the CEO of TripAdvisor, and they just launched TripAdvisor Plus, and
which is the membership product.
Right, the membership product, which we can debate if it works or not. I don't know. Depends on how you're looking at it. But in general, it's sort of groundbreaking that you can pay, kind of like Amazon Prime for TripAdvisor, right? So you pay something and then you get better prices, or at least that was the original premise. And then in the audience, you have these C-levels from all the big hospitality brands, which are members on our platform. And so the type of conversations that happens there, really, I don't think it'll happen anywhere else. And we make sure there's no press involved. We don't record the meetings and anything. So everyone feel pretty safe doing it. And then, I don't want to mention names, but in the end of the day, there was one person asked a very tough question. Steve kind of figured out a way to, give a proper reply. And then they ended up having another meeting outside of the platform. And so the guy came up to me and said, look, without this platform, I wouldn't be able to set this meeting. It'd probably take me months. What took me like a week or week and a half, 2 weeks.
Right.
So that's kind of the type of thing we want to facilitate. We do lots of different things to try and kind of essentially bridge the gap. So it's sort of a startup. So we don't have a formula. We're not saying, look, this is what it is. This is how it works. We're saying these are the right people. Now we need to create the right interactions so that this community, as you well put it, essentially helps drive the industry forward. Essentially, it solves the biggest problems. And that's the type of discussions we have on the platform. So yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. And one thing we're looking at right now, and this is kind of like a spoiler, we have a lot of people that don't meet the criteria for this type of thing, right? They're not veterans of the industry, for example, or they're not, C-levels at Marriott or whatever. But they do want to participate. They do want to be part of this new, let's say, community, this part of this network that tries to really push the industry forward. And so we're now working on like a fellowship where we have a community for these type of individuals that are, maybe not the right fit for the leaders platform, right? The top 100 people, top 500 people, but they're still, maybe they're getting there. They're working on their journey to get there. And so we want to help accelerate that. And so that's kind of what we're working on together with Focusrite to launch, a slightly bigger venue for this type of interaction and get more access to these type of individuals that we bring to the table, to people who are not necessarily C-level, could be, a founder, a relatively early founder with the right experience, or it could be, a director at one of the biggest travel companies or a company that has a relationship with travel and just wants to elevate their career. Anyway, so that's in a nutshell.
Interesting. So your objective is basically to make the industry accessible, and this is extremely important because the industry isn't accessible. Like you pretty clearly see that. Like whatever you're trying to get to someone or you're trying to get to work with somebody, it's tough, and you have many intermediaries in between. So in a very normal way, like in an easy scenario, you go through LinkedIn. In a complicated one, you're paying a lot of money to get to know somebody in this industry because it's pretty old-fashioned in the way I think it should be working. But you are creating, this is a very competitive space. So you're bringing some very democratic, very open vibe to this industry with your objective. Why do you believe the power of community will take the industry forward, and why do you invest so much in this?
Well, I feel, it's a good question. Look, I'm a strong believer in community. I believe, well, it's not really community. I believe in people. That's the reality. I think in general, people, I don't know about every industry, but in travel, there's something, I think, slightly different. People are kind of addicted to some degree. It's not one of those industries, a lot of people in travel, they don't necessarily make the most money, but they can't stop working in the industry because they just can't stop being part of it. It's such an intricate industry, so challenging, and on the other side, it's kind of like the inspirational aspect for a lot of people's lives. It's, for lack of a better word, it's sexy. People want to be part of it. People want to be part of it as travelers, but they also be part of the behind the scenes. And in the end of the day, I believe that people who care and are so passionate about such an industry, would be motivated to really advance it and make it better. And I think the problem is essentially putting the right people together and putting the framework around them so that they're able to do it. And no one is actually doing it. I mean, I haven't seen anyone doing it, at least not in scale. And that's kind of what we're trying to do. So I think if we put enough people together, in the end of the day, we'll be able to really make a difference. So I'm thinking about you, for example. Let's say you want to meet a certain person because you want to, not just because it's a transactional thing, because you want to expand your view on travel. I don't think there's a venue for that other than what we do.
By the way, that's part of what we are doing right now. It's this. Like,
absolutely.
Literally, like that's that.
Absolutely. That's why I think what you're doing is so important. I think, it's severely lacking. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's great to hear about the stories of founders and what they did and everything, and all these different things that you can find. But if I want to just talk about a specific situation, let's talk about opportunities for the creator economy in travel. Let's talk about, digital nomad and what it means for travel. Let's talk about even the boring subjects, which are now becoming actually very interesting, like corporate travel. Corporate travel completely changed now. I mean, no one knows what's going to be the future of corporate travel, but you can make assumptions and you can have an interesting discussion about it, and it will help lead the industry forward if we have this conversation now. So, for example, on the platform, when the SPACs were like all the rage, so we brought the leaders of 3 of the biggest SPACs and help create a venue for people to have a conversation about it.
Right.
And that doesn't exist. I think it's mind-boggling that it doesn't exist. And I think our ability to do it is pretty much tied to the community's will to be passionate about it. And I think in our industry, it's a no-brainer. So that's kind of the way I'm looking at it from our end. But honestly, I mean,
I, by the way, have to say something.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's, when I started in the industry, so I'm coming from the tech industry as well. So I did Rapid API before, co-founded with Ido, and previously did like social media. So I did like many very techy stuff. And then when I moved to the travel industry, people were like, why?
Yeah.
And I was like, I was asking the same question. But one thing that extremely excites me, and you said that, is first of all, it's extremely large. Everybody wants to travel. But moreover, this becomes a goal for the future generations. So Gen Z and millennials, which is we are, and the younger ones, they prefer travel over everything. And I see the cultural shift becomes extremely important in the intersection between travel and technology, because travel hasn't really changed much in the recent 20 years, in the last 20 years, sorry, but the consumer did. And now, how do you meet that? And that's what excites me most about travel. So, TripsGuard, TrueSpots, whatever we're building, it's always with travelers in mind. And I think there's a large difference between what we see today and what we saw 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and etc.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think, if there are more venues where this type of exchange can happen and people can actually interact with one another, but also with the right powers that are at play here, then, we'll create the new solutions, we'll meet the need, and essentially travel will be better. I think travel right now, not the best experience. Depends on, or it depends. Or travel is pretty big, but if you need to
That's true.
fly somewhere across countries, maybe cross continent, the experience is not the best. But it has to be because it's part of what it means to be alive, I think. So that's kind of that's the driving force anyway behind this whole thing.
Cool, man. I think we've had 30 minutes of so many important insights, and I encourage everybody who's listening to this session to go to Travel Tech Nation. And I'm a proud member, so join me
Yes.
as another proud member. And I think you're doing an amazing job. So thank you so much as this podcast host and as a member of the industry.
Yes, no, I appreciate it. I think it's, like I said, I mean, I think what you're doing is awesome. I'm, excited to be part of it. And, we'll make sure also our community can see everything you're doing with this amazing podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
You too.